Hello, my name is Jason Freeberg. I'm a program manager on Azure App Service, and today we are going to create a JBoss EAP site on App Service, and then we're going to deploy an application onto JBoss, and then finally we're going to configure the JBoss server to communicate with my Postgres server that I already have created here. So we're already in the Azure portal, so first thing I'm going to do is come over here to create a resource. And then we're going to create a new web app. And here I'm going to select my resource group. And then here I'm going to give a name for the site. So we'll call this JBoss Demo 3. And then here we're going to deploy code. You can also deploy custom Docker containers if you have your own image that you maintain. But here we're just going to deploy code. And so on a runtime stack, here I select JBoss EAP 7.2, and this is currently in technical preview, running on Java 8. So I'll select that. Here I can choose my region. Central US is fine. And then finally, my app service plan is essentially the compute tier for this site. So here I'm running on our premium SKU. And now I will click Review and Create. So this gives me an overview where I can look over my selections. And then finally, I'll hit Create. And so this will create my site on top of that app service plan. Okay, great. So the resource is created. So let's go ahead and browse to it. So here I'm looking at the overview for my app service. And on the left-hand side, we can see that there's pages where I can set up CI/CD, where I can do configuration. I can also scale out to more instances or scale up to a better hardware tier. But first things first, let's go ahead and deploy a app onto our JBoss site. So let me pull up PowerShell here. And now I'm going to use the Azure PowerShell commandlet to deploy a WAR file. So here we have publish AZ web app. I'm pointing to my resource group, which was Freeberg demo, and then my application name. And then here I'm pointing to a WAR app that I created earlier. So we'll run this. We'll ask for a confirmation. And now we'll run this command. Okay, great. So the deployment went through. And here I have some summary output about the site. So let's go back to the portal. Let's check on our site here. Perfect. So here's my demo application. It's just a pet store where you can buy some animals. And then let's hop back over here. So now what we want to do is configure the JBoss server to communicate with my Postgres database. So I need to deploy some configuration files onto the server. So the first thing I have is my JDBC driver, and then I have the module descriptor for the JDBC driver, and then I have some CLI commands for the JBoss CLI that will add the module, register the data source, and then finally add the data source to the session. And then finally here I have a startup script because app service is a stateless service. So these configurations need to be executed every time the container starts. So by starting this startup script every time the container comes up, every container will be configured the same. So now we're just going to FTP these files onto my web app. So here I'm selecting those 4, and we're going to deploy those up to the container. Perfect. Okay. So we have those dependencies up. The next thing we're going to do is come over into the configuration blade. And then here on the startup command, we're going to point to that startup script. So now every time that the container starts, the startup script will be executed, and that will configure our JBoss server. Cool. Awesome. The next thing I have to do is set my connection strings for the Postgres database. So let's bring over PowerShell. And here I'm going to use the Azure CLI, point to my resource group, point to the JBoss site, and I'm going to set app settings, which are essentially environment variables, for my connection URL, my admin password, and the username for the database. So we'll run this. Perfect. So here, this tells me that my connection strings were set. And now if I refresh the portal here, we should see that I've got my app settings set right there. So perfect. So now let's go down the left-hand side here, and we'll use SSH to get inside the container, and we can make sure that the JBoss server is configured correctly. So first thing I'm going to do is connect to the JBoss CLI. Then we're going to read the data sources that are configured. And so here we can see Postgres is listed as a data source, which is a good sign. And now we're going to test the connection. Perfect. Okay, so outcome success. So the JBoss server is configured correctly. And now our next step is going to be to redeploy our application to use JBoss. So let's close the old version. All right, so our next step is to configure our sample application to use Postgres. So here we'll pull up the persistence XML definition file. And now, before it was just using an in-memory database called example data source, DS. Now we're going to set this to Postgres DS. Perfect, so we'll save that. And now we will rebuild the application. We're skipping tests for the sake of brevity, but don't do this in production. Awesome. And now we're going to use the same command as before, publish AZ web app to deploy the application. So we'll run this, confirm, and cool, there we go. So we've got some summary output here. So now let's move this out of the way. All right, now we're back in the portal, so we'll hit browse. Perfect, okay. So this particular application is configured so that if it can't connect to the data source, then it won't start up. So since we changed the data source to Postgres and redeployed, and since it's running, we know that it's talking to Postgres correctly. Awesome, hope you enjoyed the demo. For more information, you can go to our App Service blog, aka ms/App Service blog. Keep up to date on our latest information. And actually right here is our article on on JBoss EAP.